Starting on August the 1st, members of the Green Party of England and Wales will be voting to elect a new deputy leader. Now, this is a really important moment for the Green Party. There hasn't been an election in a decade where an incumbent deputy leader hasn't been standing. So this is an important moment for the future of the Greens, and it will set the direction for the next 2 years of where the party is going. Now, there are 4 candidates in the race, and I'm interviewing one of them today. But before I introduce them, I just have one thing to ask you to do, which is to scroll down right now and hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you a penny, but what it does do is it means you won't miss out on any of the other interviews we're putting out in the coming weeks and months. And it also helps Bright Green out massively too. So scroll down right now, hit that subscribe button, and have a great time. So without further ado, I'll introduce our candidate that's with us today. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Zack Polanski. Zack, how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'll start you off with a slightly easier question than maybe what's coming later on. And it's just, what do you think you can offer the Green Party that none of the other candidates can?
Thank you. A great question, but I'm looking forward to the more difficult ones that are inevitably coming. I think the big thing that I can offer this party is a general election is coming, and I will make sure that we are election ready. Now, how does that differentiate from the other candidates? Well, I think having an elected representative in the role is really important. Now, I want to caveat this, that Amelia Womack has done an incredible job as being deputy leader, and I don't use that adjective lightly. We all know how much she's been around the country, but it's not just that as well. Ideologically, philosophically, at the heart of the party, standing up for the right things, campaigning for the right things, creating difficult conversations where they need to happen, and never running away from what's necessary. I can't say thank you enough to Amelia. And when she became deputy leader, the party was much smaller than it is now and had much less of a national presence. Now, over the 8 years that she's been deputy leader, she has grown the party as a huge part of that team. And it's a huge part, and thanks to Amelia Womack, that I can sit here today and say this party is now ready to take the deputy leader role to a new level. And I think when I talk about that new level, again, it's recognizing the work that's happened before and saying by having someone who is in elected office in that role, we are demonstrating to the media that the Green Party is a serious party, that we're a credible party. We have people elected both in England and Wales, of course, we're in government in Scotland and other places in Europe. And essentially, what I think I can bring is to get us election ready, make sure that I'm constantly putting the focus on the fact that local parties need to be selecting. I'm worried I didn't say the word enough times, selecting. Make sure we're selecting people in target constituencies, that people are ready, that they're supported. Where there's obstacles, there will inevitably be obstacles, that we overcome them. And then just to finish off, because I know it's an interview and I shouldn't just talk at you, but I'm enjoying not being on LBC or Sky where I'm not constantly interrupted, so I can actually finish a sentence. I think it's important to remember why we want Green MPs. It's not just some kind of game. And, you know, I love sport, I'm competitive, I get that side of it too. But ultimately, look at the state that this country is in right now, whether it's offshoring refugees to Rwanda, the cost of living crisis, how we've dealt with the pandemic, the after effects of Brexit, a government that are incapable of not lying, an integrity crisis at the heart of everything. I mean, I could just keep listing how many things are going on. And I've spent the day on the picket line today, which I'm sure we will talk about, but talking to the workers there about the fact that their pay is being cut during a cost of living crisis while CEOs are taking literally millions of pounds. So you then go, there's this intersectional crises that are affecting some of the most vulnerable people the worst, much worse than other people, particularly people from marginalized communities. And we need to make sure that there are Greens on TV and radio all the time, speaking clearly and honestly about the change that we need. And I think I've demonstrated my ability to do that in my role at the London Assembly. But almost more importantly than that too, I've demonstrated my ability to go out to communities and amplify their voices and encourage their voices onto TV and radio. And I think it's all of those things that make me a unique candidate in this race, that is the right candidate to get us general election ready, make sure we win Carla Denyer in Bristol West, but also we're focusing on other MPs as well and making sure we get our next set of Green MPs.
So that leads me really nicely on to my second question. And you've kind of frontlined there in your pitch as to why you think you'd make the best candidate for the role around getting the party general election, get ready, and getting more Green MPs elected. Now, in your in the material you've put out for your platform, you said that you are you're wanting to deliver 2 to 5 Green MPs at the next general election. Now, I've been covering Green Party leadership, deputy leadership, executive elections for a number of years now, and that claim has been made by a number of candidates over a number of years that they are the one person who will be able to deliver the electoral breakthrough that the Green Party needs to make. So, you know, we've seen a number of leaders, deputy leaders over the last few years who've made similar claims to the one you've just made. So why do you think you're the person who'll be able to deliver it where others have failed?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I have to reject the question, which is always annoying as a questioner. It won't be just me. This is something that we have to absolutely do as a team. And it shouldn't be on one person who's previously been deputy leader or leader or whatever position to kind of play a blame game or say, why didn't you do this? And also we know as much work as we put in as a Green Party, you also need national events on your side too. But by God, a national events on our side right now. We have a government that is absolutely appalling and a Labour Party that's shown that they're just not up to this challenge. Now, it's not good enough for us to get out there and just, you know, slate the other parties. We have to offer a positive vision ourselves. And I think we do have that both in the Green New Deal, both in our commitment to social, environmental, racial and economic justice being interlinked with intersectionality. Anyway, all of those things, but I want to still answer the question directly. I guess the question is, how can I be part of that team that has got us there in a way we haven't before? And I think we're already on our way in many ways. We know how to win. We are now at over 550 councillors, and I want to make sure that we're winning more councillors. We've really got to make breakthroughs there. I want to see people on the Senate. I want to see more people on the London Assembly. And as I've said, I want to see more MPs. And I think the way we do this is by empowering people. And I think Andy Fewings in Burnley actually had a brilliant quote recently about this, where he said one of the reasons why he came and had a shock victory as a councillor was the other parties who constantly said we couldn't win started to believe their own spin. And actually he won with a majority, I think it was 66%. And I think a real thing we have to do as a party is believe. Now, we can't just believe and not do work. That way won't work. But I think when we're doing the work, it's absolutely about making sure the entire time we remind people that we are winning. We're getting Greens elected. And what we now need to do is make that breakthrough. And that's why I put breakthrough on everything I've done, because I think that is the key phrase here, is we've been so close so many times, but we've got to do it. And that's why I put that focus on Bristol West as well. Last time was more complicated. Carla had only just been selected as a candidate, and we were bounced straight into a general election. I'm concerned that I think we're maybe possibly about to be bounced into general election too, but we're much more ready this time. We've done the work. Of course, we could do with more time, and we can do with more prep and more resourcing. But ultimately, I went to Bristol West recently and went door knocking with Caroline Lucas and lots of other people from the party. And when you knocked on people's doors, it was clear that it wasn't straight away. Don't want to be disingenuous. You didn't open doors and people go, yes, I'm voting Green. You opened doors and people were already sympathetic. You had a minute or 2 minutes chat, and then people were literally saying, yes, that makes sense. I'm going to vote Green, or I will look into it. So the question then is, can we mobilize enough people to have enough conversations in Bristol West and our other target seats? And I think that's the key here. And so to bring it back to the question, I think one of the reasons I can do that is I've demonstrated that I do that constantly. I'm always out there supporting Greens in their local parties and championing the work that they're doing. And I think, you know, it's not going to work if it's just me doing that. It requires everyone. But I think I will be a huge part of that team. And as deputy leader, I'd be really proud and excited to do it because I genuinely love doing it.
So you've mentioned a little bit there some of the political context that we're kind of experiencing at the moment, and we're recording this on the day of a CWU strike. We have more rail strikes from the RMT union and ASLEF coming up, as well as from the CWU. There's ballots going on left, right and centre across the economy and across the workforce. It looks like we're heading to an intensification of industrial unrest. And we have a Labour Party that is sacking its frontbenchers who attend picket lines and failing to stand up for workers. The Green Party obviously has stood firmly behind the trade union movement in its claims around better pay in line with inflation, working conditions, and decent work. Now, given that context, given the Labour Party's move to the right under Keir Starmer, its abandonment of the trade union movement, how do you think the Greens can utilise this particular moment, and it will rumble on for several months, to demonstrate that the Greens are a legitimate force of the left, and to utilise that for political development and ultimately to gain political power?
I think this is a really good question. It's a timely question for me because, as people know, I'm often out on picket lines, and it's something that is dear to my heart. And I just want to shout out Matthew Hull and the Green Party Trade Union Group, who have been doing brilliant work, both in encouraging elected and non-elected Green Party members to get to picket lines, to get involved with the trade union movement. And I think it's really important that that work is deeply embedded, and it's not just that, you know, one person turns up on a day and speaks at people. I think it's genuinely about what is our new relationship with the trade union movement and how do we foster that. And that's gonna be cause ruptions. And I've had this just yesterday. A Labour Assembly member who I work with on the London Assembly, who there's their transport spokesperson. I don't want to name them directly because actually they're generally a good egg, and this isn't me kind of encouraging fire at them. But they were bothered that I'd been at the picket line and that I commented that Sam Tarry had been fired. And they said that this was rank opportunism and Greens needed to stay in their lane. And this is not about that individual. It's about a Labour mentality that they are entitled to trade unions votes, to workers votes. And I'd also add that to people of colour and working class communities, although it's a separate but related conversation. I think what we need to be doing essentially is solidarity. So it can't just be creating policies or just saying things. We do genuinely need to do the work. And that's why today I went for picket line. I didn't just turn up for a photograph, genuinely went and listened to people and talked about their concerns. And it was things like, one point I had a conversation today with someone on the executive about the universal basic income, something I'm very passionate about. And in London, something I've been pushing London Mayor Sadiq Khan on. The mayor's now said to me that he will think about doing a pilot if I can prove it can work. So I've commissioned some research into that. And that could bring 100,000 Londoners out of poverty. So I think we've got good solutions to this. It was really clear to me that some people in the trade union movement were really skeptical about universal basic income. And that's something I've known for a long time. It wasn't news to me, but it was really useful to be able to almost have an informal chat to say, okay, what is your worry about this? And without catastrophizing, they said they think it's a right-wing thought experiment. And just as they said it, I was really clear that the gulf between where the policy is and what it is and people's expectations or worries of it are completely different. And I think, you know, as Greens, we can dig in and just say, no, we're right. Or we can go, okay, that is a gap we need to work on here. So I'm going to go back to my office. I'm going to look at not only speaking to communities, but actually how can I do genuine work with trade union movements to find out their concerns about UBI and make sure that we can deal with those concerns before we make proposals. All right, that's a slight tangent there. But that's one thing. I think it's solidarity, genuinely listening to the concerns of people, not just speaking at them, not notifying them of things, but actually genuine consultation and working with people. That's not just trade unions, that's anyone, anytime. And then I think it's the second part, which again is where Matthew Hull and Alexander Salons have been doing great work, which is looking to create policy in the Green Party movement that speaks to these people. And I think we have been guilty as a party of being cerebral, of being heady, and those things are important. I'm never knocking good financial, economic sense or good credible policies, but they absolutely have to be interesting and they have to speak to people. And I think we can have the best manifesto in the world, but if when we get on TV and radio, we don't have something exciting, interesting to say, then it's never going to cut through. And not even is it not going to cut through, TV companies, radio companies just aren't going to have us on because they can find other politicians with better, more entertaining ways of saying things. Now, we have to be careful there. I don't want us just to become an entertainment piece. We're not just there to pitch wild and radical things, but I do think we need to find ways of saying our policies, which will genuinely change people's lives in an interesting, informative way that will speak to people. And I think that's what we need to do with the trade union movement too.
So a slightly broader question when it comes to elections. Political parties that are successful, they build powerful social coalitions of different demographics, of different interests within society at large. So, for example, if you look at the Conservative Party, you look at the Labour Party, they have clear social coalitions that has propelled them to power at various points in their history. And if you look at the times when those parties have performed less favourably, for example, the Labour Party in 2019, it's when that social coalition hasn't been held together. So in 2019, what you saw was the Labour support amongst people living in cities, students, young renters, people of colour, ethnic minorities, migrants, that held up. But their support of sort of older homeowners in the north of England collapsed, and that allowed the Tories to have that huge majority. Now, the Greens at the moment, it's not clear to me what the social coalition that our electoral strength is currently based upon. So in order to deliver the electoral success that you've talked about and that you want to see and that you think that you can deliver, what's the social coalition that you would pull together to deliver that?
I love this question. And I think it's key as well, because if we don't know who we are and what we stand for, then what are we winning for? So it's got to be clear that we've got to have those core messages. And I think to that, you do go to our philosophical basis, you go to our policies, but I still accept that there's a challenge there, that we have seats where we're facing Labour and we have seats where we're facing Conservatives, and the messages will be slightly different there. Now, I think that's okay, as long as you've got your frame in place and as long as it's very clear what you stand for as a party. Now, I know people are wary of people saying we're neither left nor right, we're green, and I get that. I think it's quite clear that we are a left party or a left of centre party, and I think we should be proud of that. And I think we always need to make sure that we maintain that. And at the same time, I think it is helpful to think about what is a green vision outside of that kind of binary framing. And it comes back to what I said earlier, that there's no environmental justice without racial, social, and economic justice too. Now, that can't just be a slogan. That has to be embedded in everything we do. And I can't count the amount of times, I'm sure anyone watching this, where you say to someone who's not particularly political, yeah, I'm in the Green Party. And then if they're being supportive, they might mention something about their garden, or even about climate change, or even if you're really stretching, about air pollution. Very rarely will they talk to you about our drugs policy, or about indiscriminate or racial policing, or stop and search. Some of these fantastic policies that we have that are really important, that again will make a genuine difference to people's lives. Or sorry, I'm just picking things out of the hat here too, but we've got lots of them. Things like supporting the Gypsy Roma traveller community, something I'm really proud of. And I think other parties just, you know, they've made a calculation that they're not voting much and they don't need to stand up for them. So I think that protecting of minority communities and that genuinely visionary, progressive, intersectional approach is what the party is, and that's a green approach. What I think we've not necessarily done yet, and we badly need to do, is for people to know that's a green approach, because they hear green politics and they think environment. Now, I'm not dissing the environment. I literally chair the environment committee. I massively care about climate chaos. We've just seen the worst heat waves that we've had in a while. The London Fire Brigade just had their worst day since World War II in terms of wildfires. We clearly need to be talking about the environment. That needs to be a priority. We don't have long left. And at the same time, we always need to be linking how the same solutions to the climate crisis are the solutions to the cost of living crisis. I'll put in a frame here that I usually do it the other way around, because people expect us to care about the environment. They don't necessarily expect us to care about cost of living. So I think the more we can talk about cost of living and those social issues right up front, because that gets people to notice, oh, this is the Green Party talking about something I don't expect, and make sure that's then backed up by the environment, because that's pretty vital. Then I think that's how we build that coalition, how we're relevant, and also how we get Greens elected. And by the way, that's the same question to the media point too, because I think we're talking about things that feel relevant to people, they're on the day-to-day basis. I've really learned from Sian Berry in lots of ways, our fantastic previous co-leader and also our mayoral candidate and my colleague on the London Assembly, who always talks about, like, we don't want to go on TV and media and be green fodder. We don't want to go on and just talk about veganism, although I am vegan and, you know, I defend that. But we don't want to be like fodder for the kind of Piers Morgans of the world who just want to go on and just have an argument about a green issue or paint as a middle class party. We want to be really clear about what our mission is, what our goals are, get on TV and radio, speak clearly and honestly, make sure we're knocking on doors, embedded in communities, and that there's genuine social structure there, as opposed to just being about winning elections. But that is how you win elections, but you can't skip those steps. You've got to build that process.
So you mentioned it there, the climate crisis. The heat wave of the last couple of weeks led to unprecedented record-breaking temperatures in the UK. Every report that we get from the IPCC and from other scientific bodies indicates not only the scale of the problem, but also the narrowness of the window that we have to act. The electoral ambitions that you've set out in your platform and also in this interview is of 2 to 5 MPs at the next general election. How can you square those two things, where the urgency of the climate crisis suggests that we have, you know, very, very, very few years left as a society, as a globe, to act, and yet you're talking about fairly incremental change in terms of political representation? What impact do you think that 2 to 5 MPs could possibly have on addressing the climate crisis? And isn't that far too little too late in terms of addressing the urgent things that we need to happen?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. If I'm honest, that was one of my reservations initially about joining the Green Party. And then I think Natalie Bennett did an incredible job in 2015 of linking the climate crisis and the democratic crisis. And this is where we sound the proportional representation klaxon. It is clearly a problem that we live in a first past the post system, and we drastically need to change that system. Now, one could argue you need to do that kind of out on the streets and through protest. And then an argument that I absolutely think is the right, well, it's not even right or wrong argument, but for me is the more compelling argument, is that you win power in council chambers and in parliament. And we've seen in London, but also I'll give a shout out to Oxford as well, and many other places too. I think you went from 3 to 6 councillors there, how when you're a smaller group that goes to a slightly larger group, you can really make a difference very quickly. And we've seen the difference Caroline Lucas makes to the entire national conversation. To have a second Green MP, never mind 5 Green MPs, would make a massive difference. But I still think the question still is valid. Like, even if you've got 5 MPs and you're making that massive difference, even under a first past the post system, that's clearly unacceptable. So there needs to be a long run there as well of making sure that you're changing the system. Just want to go slightly back to the climate crisis too, because I think often we talk about it kind of happening in a few years' time. And of course, we know it's happening right now all around the world, particularly in the global south. But something that does genuinely keep me up at night. So one of my jobs on the London Assembly is I sit on the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee. And I've been talking to the London Fire Commissioner a lot about resilience and the fact that at the same time as we're having these wildfires and floods, this government is deregulating on buildings. They seem to be cutting back on fire regulations and things like PEEPs, which is personal emergency evacuation plans. These are vital for people with disabilities to be able to get out of buildings. And I just feel like the government just seem completely unconcerned about the fact that there is a whole demographic of people that are so vulnerable to the climate crisis. And of course, fire as well, but the question was about climate. And essentially, we need the Green Party to be speaking up with these people, not speaking for them, but making sure we're doing it in consultation and co-designing. But I think those things are vitally important too. So sure, we've got that big kind of planetary scale about how do we stop the climate crisis, absolutely important. So we've got mitigation, we need to reduce our emissions, we've got adaptation, we need to look at things like the personal evacuation plans, like how do we change things. But actually, I think an increasingly new piece that we need to be talking about is resilience. That actually, in some ways, it is too late. I don't mean it's too late that we should stop. I don't mean it's too late that we should be complacent and just go, it's all over yet. But it's too late in terms of some of the impacts of the climate crisis will now happen. We know from the IPCC report, even if we reach the peak of emissions within 18 months, we can still hold possibly at 1.5 degrees. But we will still see climate effects from that we've been already seeing. And so I think there needs to be a big conversation about how do you protect some of the most vulnerable communities from those climate effects. And to have just one Green MP doing that is incredibly important because no other, probably not fair to say no other MP, but very few MPs are doing that. I'm thinking of Clive Lewis and Layla Moran, for instance, who probably do speak up on some of those issues. But we know Caroline has been speaking consistently on those issues, and not when it's popular, not when it's expedient, but actually because it's the right thing to do. And I think getting more Green MPs will only amplify that. And yes, it's not enough just to win a small bunch. We've got to win the small bunch that then makes the argument for proportional representation, that then changes the system. And then we need to be looking at Greens in government as have, happened in Scotland and other places. But yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's something we should all think about. And again, it's why it's vitally important that we're general election ready.
I'm going to move on away from kind of elections.
Yeah, I will give shorter answers, by the way. Sorry, I did say that
I'm
used to being interrupted.
The area that I wanted to move on to is slightly more internally focused, although it has external ramifications. Now, over the last few years in the UK and indeed across other parts of kind of Europe and North America as well, we've seen a significant increase in transphobia. And that's been whipped up in the UK by initially primarily the right-wing press, but now increasingly much more of the media as well, substantially by the Conservative Party. And we're seeing the national discourse becoming even more toxic when it comes to discussing trans rights and trans people. Now, that scourge of transphobia has infected parts of the Green Party as well. And this is, the third election for a leader or deputy of the party where issues of transphobia have rumbled throughout. So if you're elected as deputy leader, how would you tackle the issues of transphobia within the party and ensure that the party continues to be a champion for trans rights?
Right. I think this is probably maybe one of the most important questions that you'll ask me today, because this is clearly both a huge issue for the party in terms of, you said, it had external ramifications. And more importantly, to be honest, this is a huge issue in the party because people are feeling vulnerable, they're feeling unsafe, and it has led to people leaving. In fact, in a hustings, Nick Humberston, who's one of the other deputy leader candidates, talked about people who have left the party over this. And just as Nick said it made me think of Tom Pashby, who was non-binary, who ran for deputy leader, who no longer is in the party. It made me think of Tamsin, who ran as a co-leader with Amelia, was an incredible contribution to the party, who said they felt they were no longer safe in the party because of transphobia. Now, I've been really inspired in the last few weeks by someone who doesn't have perfect politics, but I think has pretty sound politics, and that's Mick Lynch, and how they've dealt with the trade union movement by going on TV and radio and absolutely cutting through any nonsense and being really clear and brave and demonstrating leadership. Now, the reason why I'm referring to Mick, who has nothing, as far as I know, to do with the trans discussion, is because essentially, as deputy leader in the party, as the leadership, there is no formal power. You have a vote on GPEX, that's vitally important, but in terms of that, there's no difference to anyone else on GPEX or any other member in terms of how you have what we would call hard power, so that ability to change things or make a difference. What the massively, though, is soft power. That's the ability to lead, the way that you put forward a conversation, the way that you listen to people, the way that you use your social media. Now, people will say social media is not the Green Party, but I think it's fair to say we are a disproportionately active party on social media because largely of the demographic of the party. So when there's nastiness and toxicity on social media, I think that affects us more than it affects other parties, because other parties can say, oh, it's just social media, these conversations aren't happening in our local parties, but actually social media really matters to the Green Party, and of course our local parties matter too. But it is vitally important that we totally take this issue head on. And so we're talking about soft power. And the only reason why I'm saying this is I don't want to be disingenuous and say, I'm going to sort out transphobia in the Green Party. What I want to be really clear and say is I'm going to be clear. I'm going to be authentic with the party and always say what I think. And that's why I referred to Mick Lynch. And what I think is that transphobia cannot be tolerated. It is not acceptable. And then to refer to another communicator who, again, is imperfect but still brilliant, I think, was President Obama. Saw him interviewed recently by Jack Harries, who does lots of work on Instagram and around the world on the climate. And he interviewed him during COP. And Obama was talking about the climate crisis and climate deniers. And he said, ultimately, there is a whole spectrum of people. You've got people who totally get it. He didn't say this, but I'm adding it. They're in the Green Party. Then you've got people like a tiny minority on another side who are climate deniers. And then you've got this whole spectrum in the middle who are kind of listening but not quite sure where they are. The people who believe in the climate, you work with them. The people in the middle, you massively focus on them. You have that respectful dialogue and conversation. You spend time engaging with them. And the people who are climate deniers, you've just got to beat them. Now, I'm not trying to deflect from the conversation here. Let's exactly take that and look at transphobia. You've got people who are massively trans inclusive, that are progressive, they're intersectional, and I'm so proud, shout out to those inclusive intersectional feminists in the party. I work with two brilliant ones, Sian Berry and Caroline Russell, who are complete allies in that. Carla Denyer, Amelia Womack. There's lots of others too. I'm getting into the danger of naming people. So those people, we absolutely know, already get it. So we don't necessarily need to be talking in those languages, we just need to represent those in our values. You've then got people in the middle, and I think this is the vast majority of people. I think of people just in my local party, other local parties I visited, not just necessarily in London, but when I visited other local parties too, who have genuine questions. They're respectful questions where they just want to ask things. Now, I think if people just want to ask things, that should be respected as long as the intention is clear. I met someone recently, I say recently, it was a year ago, at Reclaim Pride, which was an event set up in London, who was non-binary and asexual. Now, of course, I know ideologically, but in terms of philosophically, I know what those things mean. It wasn't like the first time I've heard them, but it was really interesting to sit with this person who was 18 years old, who wanted to chat, and it was clear that they wanted to chat. And we chatted for a good hour or two, sat on the grass after Pride with several Green Party members about what that meant for their identity, how they fitted into the world, and just questions I could genuinely ask in a respectful way. And I think everyone should have the opportunity to do that. I learned stuff that I didn't know before. Then I think there's a group of people who are transphobic, and sometimes that is dressed in the language of gender critical. Now, gender critical people can be in the middle. I don't think there should be a war on gender critical people. I think there are women who have genuine concerns that I would say are not in full receipt of all the information, or need to have a dialogue not with men like myself. It's not for me to decide what a woman is, but with those inclusive feminists to have spaces where those conversations can happen. But also gender criticalness is far too often dressed in the language or dressed in an acceptable language. So it is just clearly transphobia. Now, I said in one of the hustings that this has come from the far right. And I know that offended some of the people who describe themselves as gender critical. I'm not going to retract that statement. That is true. That is a fact. Let's look at the history of transphobia. And by the way, the history of anti-Semitism too, because these things are often found in the same place. And I think it's really important to note that as a society, we were pretty progressive on these issues. Self-ID was already a thing. People could already use toilets, and I'll come back to toilets in a second. These things weren't an issue. And then Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, people like that started to see that this was a way to split the left, to start to create culture wars. They focus grouped it, they saw it working, they ran with it. Donald Trump, I believe, before he ran for president, gave quite trans-inclusive statements, kind of those neoliberal kind of live and let live statements that I don't necessarily disagree with. I think live and let live is fine, although we don't just want tolerance, we want respect and embracing things. But that's a good start from where we are now. And I think it's important that we recognize that this has been weaponized. And that is not to dismiss people's concerns, but it is also not to pander to when it is transphobia and when people are being made unsafe. Now, those things are nuanced, but transphobia is not nuanced. And I think when we have those red lines of where transphobia are at, and Scottish Green Party have demonstrated how to do this, you don't have the problem that we currently have in the party. So to come back to the question, can I sort this out alone? Absolutely not. As deputy leader, will I be an advocate and champion of trans people, of MBs, non-binary people in the party, of people from the LGBT community? I'm in the LGBT community. Of course, I will be their champion. Yes, I will stand up for Stonewall. Yes, I will speak out against the LGB Alliance, which is, another kind of code for a hate group. So I think it's important to know where these people stand and where they stand and go with that. And finally, the thing I wanted to say on toilets was, because I'm talking to you, Chris, and you're an Oxford councillor, Rosie Rule, Lucy Pegg, other Green councillors in Oxford demonstrated what we need to do in toilets. They got period products included in public toilets for free. There are genuine issues for women in society. Misogyny is a genuine issue for women in society. The gender pay gap is a genuine issue for women in society. So let's not dismiss women's concerns. Women's rights are human rights too. Trans rights are human rights. Those two things are not in conflict. In fact, they both have the same problem, which is misogyny from men. And that should be united in solidarity, not pitted against each other. And I think as a Green Party, we have an opportunity here, which is a sad opportunity because it's been born out of transphobia. But we have a moment here where we can demonstrate to other parties who are also experiencing this problem. They're just a bit bigger, so they've been more insulated from it. But we can demonstrate that there is a way through that. And the way you get through that is not by kind of sitting on the fence or not having clear statements or a clear line. You have your red lines. And just final thing I'd say, because I think this has been the longest answer in history, but it's needed, I think, the nuance and the complexity of the conversation. Obviously, I've just forgotten what I was going to say because of that caveat. It'll come back to me.
Well, I have a follow-up question on this specific issue. So if it does come back to you, fantastic. So I just wanted to pick up on a few things that you've mentioned there, and it kind of ties into what I wanted to ask you anyway, which is earlier in the campaign for deputy leader, you had quite a frosty clash with one of the other deputy leadership candidates, Shara Ali, in which you accused him of being on the same side as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin when it comes to issues around trans rights. Since then, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Patrick Harvey, has suggested that Shara Ali ought to be expelled from the Green Party over comments that he's made around trans rights. Now, I should say that Shara has consistently denied that he's made transphobic comments or is transphobic, but I wanted to ask you whether you agree with Patrick Harvey that Shara should be expelled from the party.
Yeah, so I think, again, I will answer the question directly, but I think let's talk about the other context here too, which is the Scottish Green Party talking about disaffiliating from the Green Party of England and Wales. I think that's horrifically sad, and I get it in terms of I don't want them to leave, but I can also understand why they felt that they need to at least give, I'm calling it a warning shot. It's not even a warning shot at this point because it looks like unless there is an intervention, something needs to happen. Now, recently I went to Belgium and I met mayors, to a European Green Federation event, and I met Green mayors from Cologne, from Budapest, from from Stat, and it was amazing to feel this interconnectedness, this international link between Green parties. And all of them noted some of the problems we're having in the Green Party of England and Wales, and were baffled by it. I also have loved doing work with Anthony Slaughter and speaking to the deputy leaders in Wales too. Obviously, they're part of Green Party of England and Wales, and Northern Ireland too, which isn't part of Green Party of England and Wales. But my point here is that when I went to COP26, seeing all the different Greens, no matter what party they're from a country, being united in a lot of our issues felt really important. Now, I don't want to sweep over that. We know that some of the Green parties in other countries do have problematic views, and those have to be dealt with too. That's why I think Elise Benjamin and Frank Sheridan, by the way, would do a great job because they get that. But then, so we've got to look further at home. What do we do about this? Now, I don't think it's for me as a deputy leader to call for people to be expelled. In fact, I think if I do that, I just feed a kind of victim narrative that people are out for us. I think what we really need is a really clear disciplinary process, which we do, but that disciplinary process asked at conference for more people, because at the moment it is too slow, it is too cumbersome. Some of the same people that are affected by that disciplinary process, in fact, there are complaints against them, were some of the people who spoke out against more people being there. That's clearly not acceptable. And I think we all need to take that on ourselves as members to make sure we get more members to conference, so we get a more inclusive and progressive GPEX. And actually we make sure those things are in place. Now, I don't think we just solve this by disciplinary processes. Now, that's not me kind of giving a mealy-mouthed answers. When people need to be expelled, they need to be expelled. When people have been transphobic, they've been transphobic and they need to go, and the party should execute that. I also think that there are steps that should happen in between. I don't think it serves anyone for me to just wildly say, let's expel everyone. I think expulsion should be a last resort, but it is a last resort that should be there. I think when someone's a spokesperson and they say things that are not party policy and they are warned about that, then I think it's only the right course that they're no longer spokespeople. That, again, I think went on too long. I think the fact that the risk was taken in the first place was not the right move to take. But I do think there are steps in between, whether that be mediation. I'm really glad to see Annie Stafford-Townsend, who is non-binary themselves, a councillor in Bristol, leading on this with other LGBT Greens and saying, okay, let's look at what can we do here to make sure that, I guess we're talking about that middle group of people that are just baffled by the conversation that's going on, just want us to get on with working on social and environmental justice and don't really understand or have had time to understand the complexities of this conversation. So I think to create a space to do that is an important step that's maybe been missed, but that cannot be about sitting and having coffee with people who are being transphobic. If people are being transphobic, they need to go. If people are asking questions and they're asking questions in a respectful way or putting views in a respectful way, then sure, let's have that conversation. And that reminds me of what I wanted to say before, and that's what I can finish on. People will come at me with, you are killing free speech. You're stopping people talking. You're stopping people having political positions. We're a political party. The point is we have political positions. The point is, as a party and as a conference, we've decided some positions. Now, people will say that's an ongoing process, and just like we made the argument with Brexit, you return to it. But the point is, how many times do you return to it? You know, when I think about Stonewall, someone who wants to disaffiliate from Stonewall has run for deputy leader and co-leader several times and lost almost every single time, particularly in the last few recent years. Every time that's tried to come to conference, it was prioritized underneath a conference motion to reform how we do the party's AGM. No disrespect to, I think it was Adrian Spurrell who put that motion forward. That is not the most exciting motion, but Stonewall was still of less interest to people reforming our party's AGM. The motion went to GPEX and went down on GPEX. And by the way, Stonewall is less than, I think it's 0.01% of our budget. And this reminds me of the foreign aid argument that you go after a small, tiny group of people and go, why are we giving them money? Well, it's absolutely vital that we have Stonewall affiliated, not just symbolically, but symbolism is important, by the way, because Stonewall do incredible work for LGBT people. And I'm not just talking about T people. As for G, they do brilliant work for us too, and we are one community. So let's champion Stonewall, not turn them into some kind of bogey. But second as well, staff have spoken on record that when they've been worried about things going on with the party, they have turned to Stonewall for that conversation. I made a mistake in the hustings, apparently. I said that one of the deputy leader candidates said that NHS staff shouldn't have lanyards advertising their sexuality. I was told in no uncertain terms that it was badges. So I retract that statement. A badge? What, you really think that if an NHS worker wears their badge, they are advertising their sexuality? As I said at LGBT hustings, my partner works for the NHS. He does critical work, often with palliative patients, with people who are end of life. when he's meeting those people, he is often meeting young grandchildren, young children who are LGBT themselves, and has had those conversations with those people about what it's like to be a proud gay man working for the NHS. It feels like people want to take us back to Section 28, and we need to talk really sternly against that. And again, I know this will put some people off. I know that some people will say that I'm looking to create division. Those people who know me will know I'm never looking to create division. For God's sake, I work with London Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan once a month. I question him robustly, firmly. We sometimes, I would say, verge on rows. Sadiq Khan has frequently said that I'm respectful, that we have brilliant conversations that are a testament to how politics can be. And by the way, it's not just the Labour Mayor. I have good relationships with my Conservative colleagues too. Politics is very different. Sometimes they say things that I just, sometimes they're genuinely upsetting. Most of the time when they're not being upsetting, they're just being weird. I differ in how we talk, but we can still have those constructive conversations. So if people think that I'm being divisive, it's because transphobia is not something we can mess around here. It's not something where we have polite conversations. This is fascism. We wouldn't deal with it with homophobia. We wouldn't deal with it with anti-Semitism. We wouldn't deal with it with racism. Why should we deal with it any differently with trans people? The only reason why the other parties don't necessarily have their back is because they think they're such a small minority, they're not going to vote, same as Gypsy, Roma, Traveller people. As the Green Party, we have a duty to be better than that. We stand up for people, whether they're a voting bloc or not. And incidentally, talking cynically, I do think it helps us win elections because I think it demonstrates our values, but that's not the reason we do it. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And if you're going to have power without doing the right thing to do, then why have you got power? You want power, you want to do the right thing to do. And that's why when we have Greens elected, people see the difference a Green makes in the room.
I'm going to move on to the final area that I wanted to talk about before I move on to my kind of tail end flippant questions. But before I do that, viewers watching, some of them will be aware, some of them won't, that you were previously a member of the Liberal Democrats. Now, you'll hasten to add at the end of that sentence that it was for a very brief period of time and you've been a Green for many, many years longer, as you said to me before. But you joined the Liberal Democrats at the tail end of the coalition government, and you've said in hustings and interviews and elsewhere that the reason you did so was because of PR and because you felt that the Liberal Democrats were making a more vocal case for proportional representation than the Greens were. Now, I wanted to put to you that the time that you joined the Liberal Democrats, as I say, was at the tail end of the coalition. That government gave us £9,000 tuition fees. It gave us the hostile environment. It gave us workfare, the bedroom tax, military intervention in Libya and Syria, and so much more, along with, one of the most devastating austerity packages in Europe. Why was it that you thought that their support for PR trumped all that?
So I think, first of all, it's a really, really fair question. And someone could easily wince when they listen to the coalition list of what they did to this country. I think it won't be any secret to anyone who knows me, and for those who don't know me, hi, I'm the democracy and citizen engagement spokesperson. And PR is something that I talk about, I would say obsessively is probably a fair word to use for it. Now, I don't speak about it obsessively because it's just a hobby horse, although it probably is that too. It's because it's about democracy. Now, democracy is not just PR. We absolutely need to look at every form of democracy, whether that's citizens' assemblies, whether that's knocking on people's doors, whether that's about diversity and inclusivity in everything that we do. So those things are massively important too. And I still think that PR is the foundation of all of those things, because you could have the most inclusive, diverse party, and we absolutely don't, and we need to do some serious work on that. But even if we did, even if we had the most inclusive and diverse party with brilliant spokespeople, great leadership team, fantastic manifesto, and we went out to elections, we can still be squeezed by a Labour and Conservative party who say that we're not able to win, and that particularly for Labour, if you need to stop the Tories, then vote Labour. And Greens will get squeezed almost every single time on there, although we've learned way since that we can't, and that's sorry, that we might not, and that's target to win. And that's why I'm such a proponent for that, along with all the work of being genuinely embedded in communities, which, by the way, is part of target to win. People often pit these things against each other. They say we're doing target to win, which means we're not embedded in communities. If you're not embedded in communities, you're missing a huge part of target to win. So those things need to work in together too. So democracy is highly, highly important to me. I'm not dodging the question. I think, when I look at when did I get involved with politics, I really like the fact that, again, I sound like I keep referencing Nick Hamston. This is not an endorsement, by the way, but he's just said some really interesting things at hustings. One, let's speak clearly and simply about things, absolutely endorse that. And two, he talks about the fact that he wasn't a natural politician. He wasn't interested in politics for a long time and came into it much later in life. And I absolutely relate to that. I would say pre-2005, when I went to live in America, I had the most basic of political knowledge. It just wasn't something on my radar. I moved to Atlanta, Georgia for a couple of years and experienced homophobia and racism firsthand, and I think that will wake anyone up. But then when I got back to the UK around 2011, that was when the AV referendum was. I again had no real interest in what political parties were doing there, but that woke me up to the fact that people were talking about the fact that our election system wasn't fair, that our vote didn't count, and that spoke to me about a very fundamental element of democratic justice, that not everyone is included, not everyone is equal. And I don't think you need to be political for that. It's a fairly human instinct that everyone's vote or everyone's say or voice should count equally. And 73% of votes of the last election were wasted. And that's just not acceptable. So anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a long PR spiel here, as was probably expected, because you asked me a question about proportional representation. But the point being, in 2011, in that kind of electoral reform movement, the people I met were Liberal Democrats who were talking about this. There wasn't a whole lot of Labour people there. There were a few kind of Labour politicians that I remember at that time who were kind of saying it quietly, but absolutely no Tories. And I don't remember meeting any Greens at the time, although that's not to say there weren't. I just don't remember meeting them. The Liberal Democrats were absolutely waving the flag at that time for proportional representation. Now, I don't blame the Green Party for that. I've spoken to Natalie Bennett about it since. She said there was very limited airtime for a long time for the Green Party. There still is. And if you've got limited airtime, you talk about the climate. And I don't disrespect that decision. I totally get it. We've got more airtime now. I talk about proportional representation as much as possible while I talk about the climate, as I did earlier in this interview. If we've got this short period of time, we've got to get moving. And if we're going to get moving, we need democratic justice. So all of those things come in place. But I think all of these things fundamentally are green values. And to kind of wrap up this question, something I've been pushing the mayor on recently, and it's hugely important to me, and I will not stop until we get it, is something called the London Climate Panel. What is a London Climate Panel? This is a coalition of grassroots and community voices in London, but you could have them in other cities, obviously, that care about the climate. They're doing genuine grassroots work, and crucially are from diverse communities that aren't being heard or aren't being said, where the climate emergency affects them both. Or air pollution. Our air is most often toxic in areas that are disproportionately working class or with people of colour. And that you see in lots of cities, not just London. So the question is, how are these people represented? Now, I've asked the mayor if he would do the work to bring this coalition together. And he kind of gave a very predictable answer, which is a very top-down Labour answer. You know, I've got this deputy mayor to do this, I've got this commissioner to do this, I've got that. And he predictably gave all of those answers. And then I put the question to him that even when he does work with diverse communities, they are not paid. They're often kind of given a platform, expected to give their time and labour, often their emotional trauma of what the community does. But that is not sustained democratic justice. That's not sustainable. You're essentially just kind of platforming people for a moment. I'd rather you do that than you didn't at all, maybe. Some could argue that it's worse because you're pretending you're doing something. But anyway, we need to make sure that those things are sustainable. And again, that's why PR isn't just, democracy is not just about PR. It's about climate justice too. And it's about making sure that we platform those people. Just finally, to answer this question, in 2015, 2016, I ran for the London Assembly against a candidate in Barnet called Stephen Taylor, who was a Green candidate at the time. And Stephen Taylor would often in debates say things where I would then find myself almost obsessively going, yes, and then at the end of debates, he would go, you're really a Green, and I think it's fair to repeat this, I don't think you'd mind, you're better at me than this, you should really be doing what I'm doing for our party. And like I heard it, I thought it was very flattering, but I think anyone will know from being in the Green Party, you pick a party, that's where your kind of group is, and you go, actually, if this is my route to getting PR, then this is what I'm going to defend. Stephen then bought me a ticket to Green Party conference, which just struck me as a very kind thing to do. I don't think all Greens are necessarily kind, but I do think kindness runs through the Green Party. And that really struck me as an amazing collaborative cross-party thing to do, to say to someone in a different party, I think you should come to our conference with this ticket that I've paid for you. At the time, I was, literally, I was doing acting, working in bar work, doing lots of jobs, like essentially living in the gig economy and doing anything I could to kind of scrape by. So that was an important gesture too, that someone was saying, I see you, I think you're worth it, here's a ticket. Now, this would be a beautiful story if I said I went and that's what converted me. I actually didn't go, just because, again, I was working in the gig economy and I couldn't afford to go. But, and then, sorry, to finish off the story, as I said in the hustings, then met Sean Berry and Natalie Bennett. and spoke to them enough that I kept coming home and saying to my boyfriend, yeah, they're really right about things. You mentioned Libya and Syria. The Lib Dems decided to bomb Libya and Syria without even a vote. I spoke about that very vocally. In fact, I went on the media at the time and spoke out against it and said this was totally unacceptable. They still did it, and I left the party. I didn't join the Green Party straight away. I spent maybe 6 months to a year kind of non-party affiliated, but I went out campaigning or door knocking for Sean. I actually made phone calls for Clive Lewis for the Labour Party. So, and that was the year, I think, of the Progressive Alliance. So I guess I was a walking Progressive Alliance, I should say, without a pause. I also voted Green. And then Sean and Jonathan became leaders, or Caroline and Jonathan, sorry, at that time. And I think the party were building on what Natalie was doing. And I'm incredibly proud of that legacy. Now, that was years ago, and I will hasten to add that I think since then, I've got a very strong record of being a Green, of doing the work that Greens do. And I think more vitally than even just my work or my team's work at the London Assembly, being out there and supporting the work of other Greens, not just in London, but actually many local parties, in fact, pretty much every single region of England and Wales. And as deputy leader, I would look to continue that work. And to be honest, probably shouldn't say this because it's more compelling to say, vote for me and I'll continue to do this. But whether I'm deputy leader or not, I will continue to do that work across regions because I'm passionate about seeing Greens get elected. But, you know, it's no secret as deputy leader, that work will be more amplified, that work will be easier, and the media will notice that work more. So that was a very, very long answer, but it's a record that I think it's important to defend. And on that, it's a slightly different question, but people will say, but you've already got a job. Like, isn't 2 jobs, you know, dangerous? But actually, I think it's important to say that on the London Assembly, most London Assembly members are also councillors. I'm not a councillor, so I have that extra time to do that. And then the most obvious point to this is Caroline Lucas was an MP while also being co-leader. Sian Berry was a candidate for mayor, a London Assembly member, a councillor and co-leader. And I think she was pretty kick-ass at all of those things. I'm not saying I can multitask in the way Sian Berry does, but I think she has demonstrated that it is perfectly possible. In fact, I would say preferable to give the position more credibility when you're elected. This isn't me saying, I want the deputy leader because I want that platform. That's me saying, let me bring that platform, that credible, serious platform I already have, to the deputy leader position and make sure that we're demonstrating that we're general election ready, that we're getting out there and we're ready to win more Green MPs.
So we're running very short on time, and you acknowledge that was a lengthier answer. I'm going to really quickly bring you back to the original question, though, before I move on to the slightly more flippant ones, which I do want to get onto. But I guess the crux of the question, really about your past in the Liberal Democrats, is when you were a member of the Liberal Democrats, you've mentioned that you spoke out against military intervention in Syria and Libya, but there are a whole raft of other policies that coalition government, which the Liberal Democrats were a crucial part of, implemented, whether it be privatisation of Royal Mail, the trebling of tuition fees, austerity, which many, many Greens joined the Green Party over. They got politically active and radicalised by that government and ended up in the Green Party as a result of it. So my question, and I'd encourage you to be brief, is, did you agree with the coalition government's programme then and have since changed your mind?
I don't think I necessarily knew. I wasn't as interested at that point in what they were doing. I was obsessed with proportional representation. I was pleased with same-sex marriage. And, you know, that wasn't just for Liberal Democrats. In fact, Greens called for it earlier, I think. And there were other kind of, the drug policy in the Liberal Democrats was at the time to legalise cannabis. So there were kind of socially liberal things that I really cared about. I think it's fair to say that I didn't have the same social economic justice frame or perspective that I have now. And I think that's fair to own that. I think that's exactly why we need to talk to people from other parties and present these things. I think at the time, economic policy was very much presented as your kind of shopping bill, your personal kind of credit card, something that we know the Tories do now. That I think is attractive to lots of voters because it makes instinctive sense. I think people need to have those conversations and understand. I think there's an important piece there too as well, that round about that time as well, in fact, it was a few years earlier, I got more involved with the vegan movement. And I think as you get more involved with the green movement, you talk to more environmentalists who already have those natural politics. That's where those intersections of those kind of more radical, although I call them common sense politics, is. And I think actually there's a lesson to be learned there that, of course, we need to talk to Greens and our natural Greens. We also need to talk to those people who are being kind of sold those kind of instinctively easy arguments that don't make sense, that aren't coherent, and make sure we're speaking to those people, because ultimately I want people to defect from the Liberal Democrats. I want people from Labour. And actually I want some Tories to defect too. I don't think a Conservative MP is the same as a Conservative voter. And I think there's lots of Conservative voters who want to conserve things, who are bothered by the kind of right-wing Conservative Party that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak will inevitably continue. And I think we need to speak to those people and get them on board too, because that's how we grow our movement.
So I'm going to rapid fire through my slightly flippant questions at the end. The first of which is, who in the Green Party inspires you the most?
Dangerous question. Ria Patel came straight to mind. I think they're doing incredible work. They're doing stuff on my campaign team, so I'm slightly biased there. But just the fact everything they've done with the Young Greens, with the LGBT Greens, and also the amount that they do to support other people and work with other people, and they still do it with a smile, which, you know, they're kind. That's also an important value. I mentioned my campaign team. I also want to mention Natalia Kubica, who is possibly not as well known as Ria Patel, and isn't necessarily as keen on being in the spotlight, but actually is also doing incredible work behind the scenes, often behind the scenes work that's doing brilliant things. And since I'm listing people, one last one, which is Akua, who has just joined the party in Manchester. I don't know her as well, so I have to be careful about saying, you know, I can't endorse everything she says, but I gave her a phone call when she first joined the party just to kind of chat and welcome her to the party. And her kind of socialist platform for the party, how clear she is about where she thinks the party can go, what she wants to do for Greens of colour, she just strikes me as someone to watch in the party. That's no pressure on her. She has a really important job to do in Manchester at the moment with those other colleagues. But I think in time, I really hope to see kind of grow a bigger platform. And so lots of other people inspire me too, but those are three that come straight off mind.
What is your favourite and your least favourite Green Party policy?
Cool. We've been asked these quite a few times in Hustings, so I'm just ready to go with that. Least favourite is our NATO policy. It's not that I disagree with it. I think it's an important policy, but having been on TV and radio to defend it, I think it is trickier than it needs to be, and I think I've defended it well, but I just think, why put ourselves in those positions? I think we just need to refine it, make it clear that it is a long-term goal, that we're not just talking about coming out of NATO straight away when there's an invasion going on in Ukraine. We clearly need to stand with the Ukrainians. Favorite policy, I mean, it is proportional representation, but I'm going to say something different because I think I've laboured that point. I actually think the stuff that we have to say on renters is vitally important, particularly the work that Sean Berry's been doing, particularly about rent controls, rent caps. I'm also a property guardian, so that means I live in kind of old abandoned buildings for cheaper rent. It's like a legal form of squatting, and I just think, you know, I love that. But actually, I live with 25 people, and lots of the people I live with don't love it. They do it because renting is too expensive, and they feel like they can't afford a home. And although I love it because I'm sociable and I love the fact that I live with delivery drivers and chefs and people from all around the world, lots of them really don't like the fact that they don't feel like they have their own place to live, and that's not acceptable. So our stuff on renting, I think, is really important.
We can talk about both NATO and renters' rights for hours, but instead I'm going to ask you, which book has most informed your politics?
Oh, which book has most informed my politics? So the first answer comes to mind. Is going to sound pretentious, but it's true, so I'm just going to go with it. It's Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paula Freire, and this was written in the 1960s. I talked about an offshoot of it actually in the trade union Hustings, which is Theatre of the Oppressed, which I did as a community theatre and activist. But to talk about the book essentially is a very brief answer, talks particularly about education, that you can look at education in a number of ways. And one of the ways we often look at it in the West is that people are a blank slate and you just want to fill them with facts and knowledge, and then they will know and understand. Or you look at education as an exploratory process where you create the conditions where anyone can engage, no matter where they've come from before and where they're going to. And there's a genuine engagement in community. And I think, you know, I only need to give a brief answer here because that's run through everything I've said today. I think that ultimately we're a grassroots party. The work we need to do needs to be embedded in communities. We do need established leadership. There's a place for that sometimes, but ultimately it's about local party autonomy, and that comes from having communities. And I think that book, reading it in, I probably read it in actually probably around the time that I joined the Green Party. So two things probably weren't coincidence. And when I say that I was starting to form a new kind of more holistic view and systems change view of how we do things, I think that played a huge part in it. And again, I think that's something that Sean Berry embodies. She often talks about not getting distracted by the problem, although it is important, of course, to represent people, but to take that step back and look at what is the root of the problem, what is the systems change, because then I think that's how you make the powerful change, as well as the day-to-day change that's really important.
And finally, what qualities do you most admire in each of the other candidates standing for deputy leader?
And so I chaired the leadership hustings at the last election, I think a year ago, and this was a question that I asked them. So now I guess tables have turned. I was about to say that's easy in some ways. So Tyrone is very easy to say. I don't think it's letting any secret out that me and Tyrone are good friends. I have nothing but time, respect, and love, frankly, for Tyrone. When I saw Tyrone at COP26, I just felt this kind of glow of thank God, there's my friend. There's someone I really enjoy chatting to. There's someone with a warm smile, with kindness. Those all sound like not wet qualities, they're vitally important qualities, but I'm not diminishing them either as an opponent. I think they're more than a worthy opponent that has a really good background in housing issues and has a lot to bring to the party. And it's one of those things, you know, if I was running for Prime Minister and I was running against Tyrone, not that I'm planning to do that anytime soon, like they would get a cabinet position like literally immediately. So huge respect for Tyrone. I realize I'm giving long answers again. Nick, massive respect for Nick too. I was out campaigning with Nick in Lewisham, and it's clear that the local party really have a lot of time for Nick too. I think Nick's both said in this election and the last election that message about Greens speaking clearly, about not overcomplicating things. And I think that message needs to cut through. And again, it's not that I'm saying Tyrone's amazing and Nick isn't. Nick's also brilliant. Shirar, I don't want to be disingenuous, is trickier for me. They're definitely the person that I don't consider a friend, and I'm not going to say that they are. I think the relentlessness with which they campaign, you know, I wish that was for things that I stand for and that I cared for. But I think you ultimately can admire that the person doesn't give up. So those are my answers.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me, Zack. Where can people find out more about your campaign?
I think I'm quite noisy on social media, so you can find it quite easily, but I'm on Twitter at Zack Polanski. I'm on Instagram at Green Party Zack, and I'm on TikTok at Zack Polanski, although I've not quite got to Hannah Claire standards yet of making unique videos. You should check out Hannah Claire's videos. They're great if you don't already. I often just use videos I use on the other platforms, but that's something I want to work on, because I think it is, it's just important that we're always reaching new platforms. And you can find me at vote.zackpolanski.com. I'd also say, like the other candidates too, so I'm not distancing myself with this, I'm very accessible. So if anyone has any questions, then please do reach out to me, and I'm literally happy to answer anything.
Thank you so much, Zack, and thank you to everyone for watching. This is the second of the interviews that Bright Green has released with the candidates for Deputy Leader. You can go over to our YouTube channel now and see the first of them, which is with Tyrone Scott. Now, you'll notice that this is the second and that there are 4 candidates standing in this election. Nick Humberstone and Shara Ali, if you are watching, I would love to interview you. So please do get in touch. Please reply to my emails and we can set up an interview at a time of your convenience. And if you're not watching and maybe someone who's on their campaign team or somebody who knows them is watching, you could give them a little nudge too. And we'll get them on our channel and give them the kind of scrutiny that we've given Zack today. So before I let you all leave, I just have a few final things to say. The first of which is what I said at the beginning. If you don't want to miss out on any of the content, the videos that we're putting out in the coming weeks and months, please do hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you a penny, helps you out, helps Bright, can't even say the name of the publication anymore. It's been such a long day. Helps Bright Green out too. Everyone is a winner. The second thing is we've been talking, me and Zack, for about an hour now. I'm sure there's plenty in there that you've agreed with. It may well be there's some things in there that you've disagreed with. Let us know what you think in the comments down below and keep the conversation going down there. And finally, it may surprise you to know that Bright Green does not have the backing of billionaires and big business. We rely solely on the kind and generous donations and contributions of ordinary people like you. So if you've enjoyed this interview, if you enjoy what Bright Green does, if you find it valuable, please do head to bright-green.org/donate and set up a regular contribution so that we can keep putting out videos like this, keep running all the coverage of internal Green Party elections, of the Labour movement, of social movements and the wider left. bright-green.org/donate. So thank you all so much for watching. That is all from me, and I will see you all very, very soon.